Hi, welcome to an interview with Kevin Kuhne, whose exhibition is coming up here in May at the Arkell Museum in Canajoharie Library. Kevin's show is titled Kevin Kuhne, Bygone Framework. And I am Kelso Mayo. I am the curator and registrar here at Arkell. And this is Kevin.
Hello, I'm Kevin. I'm a local artist based in Albany, and I do a lot of workshops and teaching in addition to painting and showing and a lot of shows around here. And
Great. So this show will be May 16th to August 9th, so please do come on by. And we were also going to have Kevin speak on July 11th, 2 p.m. for an artist talk, so please join us then. So Kevin, to start with, I wanted to talk a little bit about your background, where you're from and where you've ended up.
okay, I was born and raised on Long Island and stayed there until the end of 10th grade. And I was always the kid when they needed someone to do artwork or make a poster or something in the class. I was the kid they went to, and so I was always doing that. And a lot of my work now is should I get right into this right now? A lot of my work is scenes of urban and urban decay and just interesting buildings. And even when I was a kid, I was always wandering around the different neighborhoods. I grew up in a little town called Sayville, actually in West Sayville. A lot of beautiful old Victorian architecture there, and a lot of industry too, right down the block from me. So I was always, I was always getting in trouble trespassing a little bit. I'd go inside warehouses where I shouldn't have been, and wander around the neighborhood and different neighborhoods, and just really was interested in architecture right from an early age. It just caught my eye, and it's been with me ever since.
Amazing. I was wondering, in the region you grew up in, did you feel art was an option or something that you felt like you could go towards?
Never. I did. There was, I was encouraged in my work. I actually did not take any art classes when I was in high school because I just had such a full schedule. I couldn't fit anything in. My original goal, and as I started off in college even, was I thought I'd be going into mathematics or engineering or that sort of thing. I wanted, but I did, when I left the Long Island at the end of 10th grade. My family moved to the American Virgin Islands, to St. Croix. And there was a big art scene down there. And one of my neighbors was actually an artist who had a gallery. And coincidentally, he was also a math professor at the local college. So I thought, I could do math and art, But it made me realize, you could actually do this for a living. I still did not intend on doing it when I was in high school, but I think it put the idea in my head, in the back of my head, and there was tons of great architecture down there, the old sugar mills and everything that I would do lots of sketches of.
So that was when you first started?
Yeah, I was doing little paintings and sketches of sugar mills and scenes around the island, which actually wound up being in my high school yearbook, some of them. So it was,
wow,
so
that's
it goes back that far, yeah.
It's a record of your work all the way back to high school then.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna brag about that work, but I was still doing it then.
I think this might be a good point to maybe grab these sketches too. You can show.
Oh, sure.
I'll just check this is still good.
So, one thing I did learn in college was to carry a sketchbook with you all the time and be prepared. I don't carry it around with me, but it's in my car, it's nearby, and I just fill up these sketchbooks. I don't even realize how fast I'm filling them up. This painting here of the old beech nut factory, which no longer exists anymore, and I did after the beautiful beech nut sign came down, was after one of my visits here to the Arkell. and I may have been dropping off a painting for another show or something, but then I went over onto the other side of the, what is this, not the creek here, and found a nice spot to sit, and I did this. This little ink pen with some watercolor wash on top of it, and I thought, oh, that'll make a nice, that would make a nice large painting, and then I did a little color sketch too. Did I put it here?
And it's amazing to
Anyhow.
think this painting is in our collection here at the Arkel as the connection to the Beach Nut Factory, which the Arkel family had owned. And it is amazing we were able to acquire this from you, but to think it all started from the sketch.
Yeah, it started from this, you know, I had my nice little what I like about the sketchbook is I don't sit up an easel or anything. I make myself comfortable on a little chair, or I find a good rock to sit on, and I just relax, and then if something comes out good, I say, oh, maybe that can become a painting. And then I tend to work more from my sketch. I don't work very much from photographs, you know, I work from my sketches. I may have a couple of reference photographs around, but not too many. I try to go with this, try to capture the initial feeling I had. Yeah.
So is it when you're working towards color, moving towards that, because obviously there's a vast difference here, is that where you use reference photos, or are you doing coloration from memory?
I'll usually do color from, like you said, from memory, or from, can I grab a?
Yeah, of
Where's
course.
that sketch that was there? Oh, here. Let me take it out. Anyhow, I had this little postcard size piece of watercolor paper, and I just did a quick color sketch, not as detailed. I finished it up at home, but a quick color sketch so you can see how the colors were evolving there. And on the back, you know, I wrote down what colors I used, what my palette was, and then I could, then between this value study, I always try to get a good value study first before I do any kind of painting. And then between this value study and these color notes, I was able to do this in my studio at home. And I try to keep it as fresh and loose as the original sketches. I'm not going for a photographic rendition here. I'm trying to fool you into thinking I did this right on the spot outside. And sometimes I do. Sometimes I'll even work this large outside. But sometimes it's just not convenient, and especially since I live in Albany, and you know, if this was a couple blocks from my house where I do so much of my painting, then yes, I would. I'd just keep going back and until I had the thing done. Yeah. So.
And a lot of your work is based in Albany.
It is.
But you do travel to other sites, and mainly factory sites, correct?
Yeah. A lot of times it's where the art shows are. Wherever I happen to be going for art shows, I get caught up. One of the pieces in the show will be of the factories in Boston Spa, because I show quite regularly at the art gallery that's upstairs in the National Museum of Bottles. It's in Boston Spa. So Boston Spa is just a gold mine of architecture and Victorian buildings, and I just sketch and paint there all the time. Plus, sometimes they have shows there, and I like to show. If I know I'm showing in Boston Spa, I like to, if I can, put in a painting, but the showing Boston Spa. So that's what I do. Cahos is another place. The old mills in Cahos, the Harmony Mills, are just so incredible to look at. They're just these mind-blowing Victorian buildings. And I from Cahos I know from I also do printmaking, so I work at a printmaking studio called Ragged Edge Printmaking in Cahos, and then that gives me the ideas. Also, I used to work across the river from Cahos, so it's more places I'm familiar with. Also, I got Gloversville is another place, which was an incredible hotbed of industry and culture and entertainment. They had the Cayuga Lake up there. It was, if you've ever read Theodore Dreiser's American Tragedy, which came out, I think 1922 or 23, Gloversville's mentioned in there as a hotspot, the place to go. And then if you've ever read local author Richard Russo, who's from Gloversville, one of his books, especially Bridge of Sighs, talks about him growing up in Gloversville. And by then, Gloversville was a typical dying Mohawk Valley kind of town, you know, nothing, very little industry, very little entertainment, restaurant, you know, you just, no one goes to Gloversville, although it's picking up again.
It is, nice. And that's what everyone's saying about the Mohawk Valley, is it's on its rise now.
It is so good to see. Boy, I still go up to Gloversville to see a show in a gallery in Gloversville, in my Acropolis Gallery in Gloversville. Wonderful little gallery. Boy, I'm giving these plugs to all over.
I know, they're going to be happy when they're
so I try to, I owe them a few paintings. I haven't given them any new paintings in a couple of years because it's kind of out of the way.
You're going to get a call now.
Yeah, and I can't believe how, there's just so much more going on in Gloversville. When I lived in Gloversville, that was 1978, 79. I'd finish work on Friday, and then Saturday morning I got out of town. You know, there was nothing. You know, it was. But now I would stay in town. You know, it's really nice. So yeah. But for the most part, I used to tell people I do most of my painting within a 2-mile radius of my house, and that's where most of my painting was done. I like to paint what I know, what I see.
And I love that you're drawing a connection to the places you're showing work to by painting a significant piece of architecture there. I've noticed there's a theme throughout where you're almost getting the feeling of the past that was there, and you're thinking about the people that worked within these spaces.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what first brought you to thinking about the dilapidation of the industry in this region when you were starting to build because you have a large body of work. And obviously there are some pieces like Elizabeth Street that are just a street and not a main building. But what was the main focus of the monumental building?
What did it for me was just about a half mile down the road from me was the old Albany Billiard Ball Company, which was this, I don't know if I say beautiful, but quite an interesting old factory. And it'd been there for years, and there's even they make the claim that that's where plastic was discovered. They have a historic marker out there saying that plastic, it was developed to make billiard ball, this type of plastic, this particular plastic, was developed to make billiard balls as a replacement for ivory billiard balls.
Which are rare to find these days.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that was it. Now, I'm saying that as a good thing, but I'm also involved in a group called Beyond Plastics, where we're trying to do less plastic, and that, you know, we're fighting against the plastic manufacturing. There's too much plastic because it doesn't go anywhere. It stays here forever. But anyhow, it still was so interesting to be living right down the block from this factory, and then one day I'm walking by and they're bulldozing it down. They were just, it was gone, and they put up this incredibly ugly strip mall there. And this would have been 1981, 82. I can't give you the exact date, but it was soon after I moved. I moved to Albany I moved to Schenectady in 1980, and I moved to Albany in 81. So this was all happening around this time. And I thought, why couldn't they have renovated that building, or at least added on to that building, or reused that building, and all the history in that building. I have a friend who was telling me how when she was a little girl and she would play in that neighborhood there, they would find the old reject billiard balls that they would dump down the hill by her house when they were playing, and I think her father might have a few. I have to try to get
I would love to see that as a billiards fan myself.
I know, you said you're a billiards fan, so it would really be cool to get hold of a few. Every time I walk down that area where she tells me they dump, I'm always looking. Am I gonna find a billiard ball?
Someday you will find a gem there.
Yeah. And then, but I thought, like, why couldn't they have reused this? You know, why couldn't they have done that? And right around that same time, my wife and I bought a house in Albany, an old, not really a fixer-upper, but, you know, it definitely needed some maintenance. And I got involved with the Historic Albany Foundation, their warehouse parts. So I was always over there buying old things for the house, you know, all the windows and the doors and the hardware in the house came from the Historic Albany warehouse. And from that I started learning about how Historic Albany is trying to you know, preserve all these old buildings, put them to new use, but they tend to just get you know, they get bought up, and then somebody says they're going to be developed, they're going to make some sort of a retail space or a combination retail, residential, and then nothing happens, and eventually they're just neglected for years and years, and then they're demolished. And, you know, we call it a demolition. You know, you've probably heard this phrase. They call it demolition by neglect.
Yep.
And a lot of the buildings that I've painted, I do have this eye. I almost can sense when a building's about to come down. There's so many buildings I've painted or sketched that were gone within a couple of years after I did that.
Because you commonly go back and check on the buildings too.
Yeah, well, most of them are in my neighborhood too. That, you know, well, Albany is my neighborhood, so it's not far for me to go. I'm always walking around and bicycling and checking out I'm always got my eye on what's going on in town, what's happening.
Which it must have been shocking to come back and see these shots.
There's a little street scene in this show where I'm sitting out in front of the library in my car and just sketching the scene with the beech nut factory in the background. And I didn't know they were planning on tearing it down. That was the last time I ever saw the factory.
Wow. I
came back, I don't know, a few months later. I'm not sure exactly the dates, but the next time I came back, it wasn't there anymore. I mean, I gasped. I was like, oh my. I was upset when they took the sign down. Somebody had told me they were gonna, I heard some rumor they were gonna put the sign back up. Instead I come back, the whole factory's gone, you know.
I do love the skeleton frame in this. It really gives that ghostly feel.
Right.
And those in sign making are called skeleton frames.
Oh, the skeleton frame, yeah. Yeah, because for many years I kept saying I was gonna paint it while the sign was up. And then when the sign came down, I said, oh, now I can't paint it. And I said, no, maybe I should paint it before, you know, just to show where the sign was. And you can still see beech nut on the smokestack. I actually collaged those little letters on.
Oh, yeah.
Collaged on, which is why I could not enter this in a pure watercolor show. They would not
because they don't accept collage.
They would not accept collage,
yes.
Yeah. But there's collage in there. So.
Yeah, quite a few of the paintings in this exhibition have the tiny little words within it.
Yes.
And they're gorgeous.
Thank you.
Yeah, your attention to those signage, which is a whole nother industry that is starting to go away with technology development.
Yes, that's right. I honestly hadn't really thought of that. You know, it's true.
You
signs.
paint your odes without knowing it.
Yeah. There's in my street scenes, I don't leave the signs out, or the fire plugs, or the cars, or the telephone wires. I use them as compositional devices to put color in or lead your eye somewhere, and you know, or just to give an idea that a street's one way or whatever.
Yeah, there's a beautiful sense of direction in this. I love the shadow coming down into the creek there too. Oh, and then the little peppermint collage here too. There's a little.
Oh yeah, right. 2 collages. I forgot about that one. I try not to look at my paintings too much after I put them up, because I'm usually gonna be saying I should have changed that. That should be, you know, sometimes the paintings I have at home, I try not to do it, but I take them out of the frame and I fool around with them.
Oh, yeah. You go back to
I try not to. I always say after I sign it, I won't touch the painting.
That's a pretty good rule.
Yes,
try to hold yourself
I have broken that rule. I have broken that rule, so that's why I purposely try not to look too much at the paintings. I forgot about that peppermint one, yeah.
How does it feel to walk into a room when you get to see everything together, too?
I think my paintings make a very strong impression as a group because they have there's an underlying theme, I think, that runs through them, that theme of aging, of history, and also you'll see the similarities in composition and color and how they relate, and they just seem to, I'm patting myself on the back here, but when I've had other one-person shows, they look good together, you know, they stand up as a whole, which pleases me, because I can't say I intended that to happen, but it did happen, and I like that.
Well, we're very happy to have this here as a whole collection,
Oh,
or
thank
a
you.
good chunk of the work.
And thank you very much for inviting me to show here.
Yeah, it's good. I've already worked on the layout, been able to discuss quite a few times to get to know your work more, and I think there's a large story that you can see when they're all together of the regional aspect of it. It's not just one building here and there from industry, it's a larger issue at hand of buildings going wayside.
Yes, yeah. It's I just get sad when I see the buildings are not being used. You know, it'd be nice to have the industry come. I caught the tail end of the industry even when I was living in Gloversville. They were still making gloves there. I hear there's 1 or 2 factories. I'm not positive. Don't quote me on that. That might still be doing it. When I taught art at ST Middle School in Gloversville, any ST people out there, we were the art. So we were off in the side, and the classroom that was right down the hall was a glove making classroom. They were still teaching glove making to students. They were high school students who came down from the high school.
Were they getting them ready to possibly go work?
To work in the glove factories. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, they actually were still in it. So that would have been 1978, 79. They were still, I'm sure, I can bet that's not there anymore, but it's, and there was a painting on the show of one of the old glove factories.
Yeah, it's something we're seeing the different industries do, and to know how vast the making was here is wonderful, and a great thing that you highlight. Something else I wanted to ask you about was, obviously the subject matter is not the happiest to think of all of this going, but you bring a beauty to it and uplift what once was in the story, you know, that this region had, and there's a great dichotomy there. And I was wondering if your color usage is purposeful in that way, the like brighter, happier colors, or if it's something that you've developed for another reason, your sense of color.
I think I use color in a pretty intuitive way, but I do, you know, if I see a bright orange brick building, I emphasize that bright orange. So I guess it does bring a certain feeling of happiness or positivity to the subject. A lot of people say to me, "Oh, you make them look so much better than they really are." You know, that's a comment I hear quite often, and I say, you know, it just happens that way. It just happens. Like there's a number of pictures in the show of a building that's called 102 Colony Street in Albany, and it's also next to the old Church of the Holy Innocents, which was built in the 1860s. It's up in the north end of Albany. That's where it's so overgrown, and there's all these fields by, and there's so much color there in the spring, and it's hard not to emphasize that. But on the other hand, there's a couple of paintings in the show. One in specific that was painted during the pandemic, where I was purposely using a lot of grays. And it was a closed movie theater right around the corner from my house, and that. And again, it was almost intuitive. I'm not sure I quite planned on it, but it just happened that way. It almost became just a study in gray of that.
And then looking back emphasize the feeling of the time and that being
Yeah.
closed. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
it was sad. It was a sad
Yeah.
time. You know, my movie theater was closed. There was a movie theater right around the corner from me that I walked to. Yeah.
That's another one that has a beautiful sign in it
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Big sign in that. Yeah.
Mhm. So, do you often write about your work, or do you just tend to keep it to sketches?
Mainly sketches. I keep a daily journal for myself, which I don't show anybody. There's nothing secretive or anything. It's just so gets my head together in the morning, and I will sometimes write about my work when I do that. And for this show, I'm writing, little blurbs for the description cards that are going with each piece, kind of trying to say what made me paint this, what I was focusing on, different. And I do like to write, but not really any kind of formal writing, no.
Yeah, I was wondering because it seems like you sometimes can reflect back on that with what you're saying, but maybe that's in your head or this journal you have. I always find the way artists interact with writing and the thoughts towards the piece is interesting, so thank you for sharing.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, I enjoy writing, I do, but I don't do it in a formal sort of way.
That's okay, not everything has to be super formal, does it?
Exactly.
Which I appreciate how easy you've been to work with and open with your thoughts on this, coming into this pretty fresh and up to the opening date. It's been great to know your development and how this works, and I'm glad we get to share it with an audience now too. I have a couple more questions.
Sure.
I was wondering, you spoke about one common response you get, and I was wondering if there's any others that you are commonly told from viewers that come to your exhibitions. Because those can always be fun, how other people see things.
Well, of course, the one about it, my wife says that often, you make that look so much better than it really was, But, to me, I'm not making them look better. It looks, these things appeal, there's a beauty in the age. There's a beauty, it's like looking at the beauty of an elderly person or something, it's that kind of thing. They've been around the block, they've been there, they've done that. Another comment I get, you get the usual, since I work outside a lot and work, I get the usual comment like, do you sell those? Or how long did it take you to do that? But the other comments I get are, people they like my watercolor technique. I know that they feel like I don't, obviously, I know that you curated the Adirondack watercolor show a couple of times, right? And you know how hyper realistic some of those watercolors are.
And incredibly precise, like sharp angles that it's almost hard to wrap your head around watercolor being like that.
It is amazing how effective it is as a hyper realistic medium. Because if you know how to use the transparency of it, you can really do amazing things with it. I, on the other hand, I just love the flow and looseness of the watercolor, and I work mainly wet into wet, and a lot of people will, they make comments on how I use the watercolor. They say it looks so loose, so free, and what they don't not realize is how much I do. And we were talking about the sketchbook. The reason I have all these sketches here, they're as rough and crude as this, and to more.
But your mark making translates from
more
sketches to the watercolor, which from other watercolor artists that I've worked with, that doesn't always, their preliminary sketches will look very different from the actual piece.
I tend to see watercolor as almost like a drawing medium, where I'm just, if I'm doing these, I'm drawing with the color, I'm just trying to get the strokes down in the direction. And whereas in other watercolors might go back and do this in a really tight way, I want to like keep this freshness. I want to keep the looseness, and I really start very wet. Like for instance, this painting here, except for where you see the pure white, I would just drench most of the paper with water, including the back of the paper, and and
Oh, so
just
you're
start.
pre-wetting and
Yeah.
then going back in with wet.
And then I work very wet into wet.
Do you ever do any dry?
Oh yeah, I do
Yeah.
some dry. Yeah, then as the paint dries, once, and not as it dries, but once it's dry, I will go back in and do dry brush and these dark marks and almost linear sort of
Like
things.
within the rocks here.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
That was done later
Yeah.
on, exactly. And you know, if I have a white area, I try to keep that dry so that so that not everything goes into that.
And you're using the white of the paper too.
I am always, I have one, my students, I teach a lot of watercolor classes, and I can say to them, what's the one rule I have, and they will tell me, no white paint. They're not allowed to use white paint in my classes. Not that there's anything wrong with using white paint in watercolor, but I try
Oh,
to
I don't
just,
know if every watercolor artist would say that.
Yeah, well, it's like John Singer Sargent, you know, I mean,
Yep.
he used so much white. I like his paintings better in reproduction. I can't see the white paint. So, John, wherever you are.
Well, there's one upstairs, so.
Yeah, we'll talk about that someday.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I do it's very important that I retain the white areas. And I did not do it on this one, but on a number of my paintings, I will use masking fluid to
I
mark
was
out
just gonna
white.
ask you that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I will use masking fluid, and yet I still paint in a loose. A lot of people use masking fluid paint in a very meticulous way, but I still paint in a loose way over the masking fluid.
Did you use that within this, or you said?
This one I did not use any masking at all. This was all direct painting. I just I challenge myself to see if I can preserve the whites without using any masking, without using any white paint. There's this one artist, Japanese-American artist, Kiko Tanabe.
Yep.
Have you know her work? She's amazing. She'll have these tiny little dots of white right where they're supposed to be, and she doesn't use any masking or anything.
I would love to see her brushes though.
Oh yeah.
To get those tiny areas so well done.
And yet she paints so loose and free. She's not one of these meticulous type people. I have a very, really admire her work a lot, not that I say my work looks like hers, but I like the atmosphere of her work, and I do try to get some atmosphere going on in my work.
Oh, I find all of your paintings that have a real atmosphere and feeling to them, and some of them are looser, and where these have more details in them. Some almost feel like they're falling or running. Not that the paint itself is actually running, but that's like the feeling, the atmosphere. Sense is giving, and I love that.
Oh, thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, and it helps to work vertically sometimes too.
Yes.
That helps. The paint runs. But yeah, I want people to see the watercolor and appreciate the beauty of the watercolor itself, you know. And so sometimes, you know, I admire the technical facility these people will paint so meticulously. It just blows me away. People, some of my, I'm in the Northeast Watercolor Society, and some of my fellow members are far more accomplished than I am in technique and really out there, you know, and it blows me away. Like people like Robert J. O'Brien, and who's from Vermont. I take classes with those kind of people just so I can learn what I can. And then I go back and paint my own way.
And then you go back to your own methods, It's always good to learn and keep developing skills.
I like to take classes with artists who paint absolutely nothing like I do, or have no, you know, just to get a whole different perspective on things. It was,
and where do you teach mainly?
I teach mainly just local places like community centers and senior homes, and libraries. And sometimes a lot of the local arts groups in Albany will ask me to do a workshop or demonstration, that sort of thing. But and my students, you know, they range from total pure beginners to people who are showing at galleries, you know. So it's nice to get some feedback from those kind of people too.
Yeah, and that must feel good to pat yourself on the back that
artists
showing galleries.
Yes, I get a little intimidated when they're in class. Yeah, I get a little intimidated, but I'm honored when they take my class. Yeah, I'm taking a class right now in Chinese brush painting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because I figured, it relates so. As a matter of fact, I have this theory now about I consider myself more of a watercolor teacher sometimes than I do a professional watercolor artist. I think of myself as a teacher, and so I like to take classes too, just to compare teaching styles. But also, I'm taking this class on Chinese brush painting, and I've had this theory now. I think all beginning watercolor students should learn about the brushwork first, and then go into the watercolor.
Representational work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's just something I've been toying with lately, especially since I've been taking this class. And the guy teaching the class is quite an accomplished artist, and he's taking classes with me, so it's kind of cool that we're going.
That's an exchange of knowledge. It takes a community to keep building.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
I find watercolor artists to be an interesting group, particularly when they come together, because it attracts so many different types of personalities.
That is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is something that maybe not all mediums do. There's usually kind of a sense of personality within certain mediums. Watercolor, it's you never know what you're going to get when you speak to someone.
But you don't know what you're going to get when you do a watercolor. Maybe you don't know what kind of people. It is true. That's the comment we get. There's a comment I get a lot, and I think every watercolor artist gets. It's so hard to do watercolor. How do you do watercolor? It's so hard. And I think us watercolor artists, we have this little secret that it's really not as hard as you think it is. What it is lots of planning. You do lots of sketches, lots of planning, lots of little trial and error things. Then as the great watercolor teacher Edgar Whitney used to say, if you don't have a roadmap, how can you get to your destination? So you plan it out. What did he used to say? He used to say you plan like a snail plan like a turtle and paint like a rabbit.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and that's what he used to say, and that's really what I have all joking secrets to watercolor that I tell my students, like just don't make any mistakes, that kind of thing. But the real secret is planning, just planning so you know where you're heading for.
And I think at the beginning of this, you said a great rule of thumb is to always have a sketchbook on you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to be able to, I trust my sketchbook more than I do my camera or my phone, whatever. It's too easy to take pictures and then you look at them and it's a nice picture, but I don't know if it'd make much of a painting. But when I start sketching, you start seeing so much of the life of things. You see, it's not just the detail, but you see people walking by and, trees blowing.
It makes it more of a living piece and then a stagnant. Sometimes when artists are using photos, the paintings can become a little stagnant.
That's true, yeah.
And it's trying to reach a perfectionism that maybe just isn't possible because a photo is so different.
Yes, I always discourage my students from painting from photographs because what happens is we all do it. We just want to reproduce the photograph, and it might as well, if you have a nice photograph, print it out in a nice photograph, put it in a frame. A painting, I feel, should look like a painting, and that's my feeling. Although I definitely admire a lot of the meticulous photorealist kind of painters. I admire them, but in my case, I feel a painting should look like a painting. I want to see the watercolor. I want to see. I mentioned Sargent as a big influence. Another one, John Yardley, the English artist John Yardley. One of the great teachers, Hazel Sohn, Kiko Tanabe I mentioned, she's wonderful. Their paintings, you can see the watercolor, you see the movement, you see the lushness of it,
And the artist's hand within it too.
Yes.
Yeah.
That just happens to be my own preference,
And we all have different preferences
Absolutely.
to art, and that's what makes it a beautiful...
Art is a banquet.
It is a banquet.
Pick and choose whatever you want.
I love that. Well, I appreciate you coming today.
Thank you.
And if anyone wants to know more about you and your work, they can come along to the Artist Talk on July 11th at 2 p.m. right here at the Arkell Museum in Canajoharie Library. Is there any last things you would like to mention?
No, I just want to say I am honored, and I thank you so much for you and the board and all the folks here at the Arkell for having letting me to share my work with everyone.
Yeah. And we're excited to have everyone near and far come and see your exhibition. And it will be great. It will be in the spring. The flowers will be reflecting outside your colors.
Yeah, you're early.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you, Kelso.
And thanks for tuning in.